Curaçao and Africa, parallel paths and shared lessons.
Good morning. My name is Javier Silvania. I am the Minister of Finance of Curaçao. I'm very pleased to be here today. Coming to South Africa reminds me of home. You have the Table Mountain, we have the Tafelberg. Your Afrikaans is similar to Dutch. And I see a lot of similarities in our architecture and even some of the nature and diversity. But our parallels don't end there. In fact, the very reason I am here is because Curaçao faced the same issue as South Africa and many of the other countries on this continent within the online gambling industry. For the past 3 years since I took office, I have been working on updating Curaçao gambling's law. We are now in the final stage of introducing a new law, the LOC. And I have learned that making rules for online gambling is a difficult and long process. Today, I want to talk about an important issue: how gambling laws are changing and becoming more similar across different countries, including between Curaçao and various African countries. I will start by quoting Albert Einstein, who once said, "The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them." Although this does not directly relate to online gambling, it does highlight the need for new ideas and ways to manage something that's always changing and has no borders, just like online gambling. Strong laws are essential as they create a fair market, ensure accountability, and protect vulnerable people. It might seem strange to compare Curaçao to the 54 nations in Africa, but we are all dealing with the same challenges. 1. Preventing money laundering. 2. Protecting players. And 3. Keeping up with technology, especially regarding digital currency and assets. It is well known that online gambling is a high-risk sector. The Financial Action Task Force addresses gambling in recommendation number 22 and mandated that casinos take preventive measures like banks do, including customer checks, keeping records, and reporting suspicious activities. Protecting players is also key. Our new law, the LOC, will require gambling sites to have strong measures to prevent underage gambling, limit excessive betting, and help those with gambling problems. Sites must also provide clear information about gambling risk and tools to prevent players control their betting. Both Curaçao and several African countries are looking at technology to improve how they regulate gambling, focusing on blockchain and digital currencies. Legislation is a meticulous and intensive process that looks not only at today's issue, but also aims to anticipate what might happen in the future. While virtual assets and cryptocurrency offer new opportunities to operators and players alike, its ecosystem and technology is outpacing the regulations aimed at managing them. The fast pace of new technologies challenges us, but we must include them in our laws to ensure money laundering and responsible gambling measures are up to date. We cannot ignore virtual assets that are happening with or without us. I began with a quote from Einstein and will end with one from Winston Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. We must work together to create a well-regulated gambling environment. It is only through harmonization and collaboration that we can collectively maintain the integrity of the entire gambling industry. I will now hand over to my advisor, Aideen Shortt, who will delve deeper into the three critical issues I outlined. And I wish you all an enjoyable and productive few days here at SiGMA Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think in everything that you've discussed there actually has been very similar to what the previous panel about regulation addressed. And so you touched on quite a few topics, and so I want to, as you said, you touched on them and I want to take them into depth. So we can show you, we're talking about parallel paths because it is really true, although you wouldn't think a natural correlation between the island of Curaçao and the 54 nations of Africa would be natural and would be real, but it does exist because we're all facing the same issues. So I want to start off by talking about the obvious one, AML. So anti-money laundering is key, as the Minister pointed out, and as Keith said in the last section. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, looks specifically at gambling when it comes to its evaluations. So I think Curaçao, like many countries around the world, including specifically some in Africa here, our objective is to stay off or get off the grey list. And so this is one thing that we have done with the lock. It's like we have built into the lock minimum requirements for AML. However, more than that, we have taken an approach where we don't have prescriptive policies and procedures. Instead, what we want our license holders and our applicants to do is to match their policies and procedures to the risk that the markets and that the business models that they perform. So for example, if they are working in different markets, if they're working in higher risk markets, I want to see more AML. The Minister wants to see better AML, more than the minimum. And if there's other more gentle markets, the minimum and maybe a little bit more is what we require. So this is our approach to AML. It's very grown up. It's very not prescriptive. Every operator needs to tell us what their business model is and justify the AML element of it. And it's only when we are comfortable as a regulator that we will say, okay, your AML policies fit your business model, not just whatever the mandated minimum requirements are. The next thing I want to talk about is player protection. Keith and Andrew from the last session referred to this. The last thing you want to do is over-regulate. It does absolutely drive the black market, and that is not something that we want. And it's not something, as Keith said, a lot of these jurisdictions like Isle of Man, like Malta, and like Curaçao, we work globally. We're not domestic jurisdictions, but we want to hold up and we want to be responsible for the global industry, and we want to hold up and be responsible for the play that happens in countries outside of our own. And so this, as the Minister said, collaboration is really important. Working together is really important. It's paramount that we all, as nations, as regulators, as individuals in the industry, really promote the integrity, because this is a high risk, it's a high tech, it's a very contentious industry, and this is where we want to find just the right balance of things, as I said, AML, but in particular with player protection. We mentioned in the last session Denmark, the UK, and some of the US markets. The UK, for instance, is considered generally to be over-regulating on the player protection side, and hence it's no coincidence, I feel, that the black market is actually growing significantly at present, and the companies are finding that they need to have different ways and different markets in order that they can actually be profitable, because it is now, due to the restrictions, very difficult to be profitable. And so in the lock that the Minister has introduced, there is, same as AML, there is a minimum requirement, as you would expect, for player protection. This includes things like deposit limits, times, wagering limits, self-exclusion, all the usual elements that are known across the globe. But going back to what I said, we're adopting a very grown-up approach. And this is something we've had the privilege, because we're starting the legislation knowing 20 or 30 years of experience. So we are asking people, show us your policy and procedure and prove to us and defend it that you are actually meeting the requirements of the market. So if you are dealing with players who deal every day, we want to know more of them than if you are dealing with players like, say, for example, my mother, who will bet once or twice a year on the Grand National and maybe the World Cup. I care, and we care less about knowing their source of income than somebody that plays every day. I care less about their source of income, and I care less about their knowledge and responsible gambling than somebody who plays every day. So this is once again where we're taking our legislation and we're saying, okay, take the minimum requirements, meet them, and then if your business model needs more, I want to see more in terms of your policies and procedures. So going on to the next part that I want to discuss, this is now part of something that the Minister and the GCB have been absolutely adamant about, and this is flexibility. So in the last session, and I presume in many more sessions over the next 2 days, we will get and we will have information about how Africa is not just one market, it is a series of diverse economies. And so too have we approached the legislation in Curaçao to reflect that. So our legislation is quite modular in that you can have one company can have different licenses can have many URLs, because remember, every single license has to have policies and procedures that reflect its business. And so this is why we have adopted this flexibility. So when our operators go into countries around Africa, around the world, they will have policies and procedures and licenses that are relevant to where they are. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all mandate. We are looking at the flexibility that the diversity of the market requires. One of the other things that we have addressed, and again, like I said, we're going to come across with these topics, and it is over the next few days, is taxation. So the move in Africa to moving the tax and the responsibility and the burden to the player is actually quite onerous, and it does not favor the player's choice in what operators that they choose. So again, our taxation is very reflective of that, and we work on the basis of we want to recognize the potential of not just large operators, but also of small, nifty, nimble operators, especially in the sense of ones that are looking at crypto-based gaming. So our taxation has been built around that. So again, all operators can have a business model that suits the market that they're in. And we know that Curaçao-based operators do target and work with African companies and do target and work in African countries. And so this is why, as the Minister said again, we want to foster collaboration, and we want a level of responsibility and a level in everything we have done in the lock is not just for the good of Curaçao, but we believe in the good of the industry at large, because that is the only way that we are going to protect ourselves as a jurisdiction, and one which is open to working with other regulators and working with other countries. I want to talk then about two more things. The first thing is the dates of legislation. So what we're looking at in many countries is, well, quite frankly, outdated legislation. The reason that the lock is being addressed is because the existing legislation in Curaçao is 30 years old. I mean, that's just absolutely kind of ridiculous in the sense of, you know, we didn't even have the internet back then. It's like, how can a law that is 30 years old accommodate the technological, the behavioral, and the payment systems that exist today? So what Curaçao is doing is a complete overhaul. What other countries here in Africa I know are doing is they're evolving legislation and adding bits to it and adding all of the time. Because legislation isn't dynamic. Regulation should not be just written and then sat upon. It's really important to keep it abreast of the current technological changes and the current, especially the current payments. So with that, I want to move on to crypto. So a lot of cryptocurrency casinos do run through Curaçao. And if you look at the African market, it's very interesting. 60% of the African market is under 25. These are our current and our future gambling punters. So going back to 2000, going back to when the internet started, going back to kind of 2007 when the iPhone was first released, we certainly I've been in the industry since '99. So we are, and I am, what we call digital immigrants. So I was not born into this technology. And the younger people, the younger population, are digital natives. They were born with the internet as part of their life. They were born with mobile communications and touch screens as part of their life. We're now at a stage when it comes to cryptocurrency where the population that are our current and future punters, cryptocurrency, they're cryptocurrency and digital asset natives. So while we, and I use the collective term we as in existing regulators, existing companies quite often fear or are concerned about crypto, our marketplace, it's natural to them. So we have to embrace crypto. We have to look at this as a part of our future. But once again, I can't remember the Einstein quote that you said, but it's really good. But it's like we are trying to legislate for something that we don't know what's going to happen next week, or we don't know what's going to happen in a year's time, and we can't even possibly imagine what will be happening in 5 or 10 years' time. And so this is where we must future-proof as much as possible our legislation and our regulations. And more importantly, this is where collaboration and openness between regulators, between operators, becomes important, because it is very much a kind of one for all for one industry. Especially when it comes to something like crypto, it's going to be so influential in gambling, and yet it brings with it even more risk than gambling, which is all pure gambling, which is all fiat, which is already a high risk. Service. So we need to keep our AML laws, we need to keep our player protection laws, and especially things like KYC. Anonymity is the underlying factor of crypto and digital assets, but it flies in the face of all regulation for gambling. And so this is where we all really need to keep and address it. And this is something, again, everything that I'm saying here is things that we are doing in Curaçao. So it's a bizarre privilege, actually, because the minister started with the view to not just enhancing the existing legislation, but to completely overhauling it. And we started with a very bizarre position of being a new regulator in a new jurisdiction, in effect, with 1,000 licenses. So we are, it's very interesting trying to cross those and transition over the the existing licenses, as well as accommodating new licenses. So one of the things that was said earlier is regulation is a necessary evil. And I respect what you said, and I disagree with it. Regulation has been proven time and time again to build a market if it's done properly. Regulation is actually a good thing. And so as long as you don't over-regulate and as long as you accommodate the nature and the business models, which is what the Curaçao Lock is working and will be doing, then you're in a position where regulation is actually welcomed because it adds value. It adds value to the EBITDA of companies, it adds value to the license, and it also attracts very, very big companies to countries and jurisdictions where they wouldn't have been prepared to go without a strong, solid legislative environment. So just to kind of, the last thing I'm saying, running out of time, but the last thing I kind of want to say now is that with regards to Curaçao, we opened our portal for new licenses in November, and just to show you that good, solid regulation works, within the first few weeks, we had over 1,000 accounts open, and we have over 150 applications in progress. So this just shows you that we are, as Curaçao, we're going to be a very large regulation. It's already the largest in terms of operator and license numbers. But the fact that so many of the operators are choosing, are volunteering and opting to undertake the heightened AML, KYC, due diligence shows you that regulation that is solid and reasonable and measured is indeed a very good thing. And I am going to close by congratulating this man, actually, whose foresight, when he started, it was one of the first things that he ever did was to decide to overhaul regulation for the good of the country, for the good of the industry. And I think you are an incredible man, and thank you very much for speaking today, Minister Silvania. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Amazing. A big round of applause, everyone.